So this is probably the moment for us to once again remind you of this awesome cloud skill challenge that we have. So check out the link down there and still sign up and try to become our new cloud skill master or ninja or hero. Badger, of course, Badger. Our cloud skill badger.
Yeah, and there's prizes to win as well, right? So
that's what I heard. So that should definitely be a good motivator. And I'm looking in my eye, in the corner of my eye, to see if our next presenter is already eagerly waiting to be introduced. Hi, Mark.
Yep. Hi, Mark.
Welcome to the show, so to speak. So we had a very quick and brief introduction through LinkedIn to make sure that we weren't complete strangers to each other.
We're never strangers in the community.
That is true. Thanks for that, Savior. That's a very nice one. So you are not just an MVP and Azure enthusiasm, but you're also a great advocate for STEM. That's what I heard.
Yes, I do a fair bit. Basically, I started off doing, if you've heard of Coder Dojo, I started off teaching kids how to code in Coder Dojo clubs. And then I joined the STEM Ambassador program, which means that I'm going around, well, in the before times, I would go around to schools and talk to children about getting careers in STEM and sort of how wonderful it is to be a computer programmer or to work in tech in general. And these days, what I also do is to go around and teach the teachers about how to do the computer science and the computational thinking, as they call it, areas of the curriculum, all the way up from 5 years old up to 18. So yes, I've certainly got me got business going on there.
Well, that's awesome, because I think we can always use more advocates and enthusiasm about any of the STEM science related activities and learning skills. So kudos for that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an Azure MVP, but I do just like to go out there and tell people about tech in general. So I'm over in Ireland, in Northern Ireland to be precise, and I manage. I'm one of the founders of the Northern Ireland Developer Conference, and that's a completely agnostic conference. So we get people talking about all sorts of things, from product management to Java to TypeScript to DevOps to Kubernetes, all sorts of stuff, and it just brings everybody together. So I'm very much not a person who lives on one side of the fence.
Well, thank you for that, because that I think we can use a lot of those sponsors in the community to not just look inwards and find our peers within the Azure community, but also to look outwards and see how we can get new people interested and just show us that, or show the world that we're not just a bunch of geeks, but we also know how to be socially interactive, even in these times.
Exactly.
Geeks with social skills. What will the world think of next?
Well, it's a special breed, I have to admit.
I must say, by the way, your studio is looking very splendid. You've got put a lot of work into that.
Well, thank you very much. But there's a whole crew here behind the scenes working on this studio as well, so we would like to thank them, obviously, as well, for this great day. But it looks awesome. I agree. So you're going to do a session about static website hosting, WordPress. That was kind of the buzzwords that I took from your session.
Yeah. The Azure slant on it is the new Azure static web apps, but I'll be talking about the whole static Jamstack thing, and WordPress as an example of how you might want to move from something old and clunky to something a little more modern and slick. So.
Yeah, well, I'm really looking forward to it. So if you're ready, then let's go.
See if I can find the right button. Right. Okay. So yes. So that's me. I am a freelancer basically on Azure. And can you see my screen? I suppose I should say. And Mark XA there is me on all the things. So if anybody wants to come on and heckle me or ask me questions afterwards, then just come and find me on Twitter. So we'll just start with a little bit of history here. So I've done a lot of things. I've worked as a developer in lots of different ways, but one of the things I've certainly done my time in is agency work and websites and stuff. And I've worked with my fair quota of CMS-based websites in particular. And what always seems to happen with a CMS-based website is everybody comes in and says, the agency comes in and says, yeah, this will be great. You can look after your own content and, you can manage it yourself and it'll be brilliant. But what also always used to happen was that you would also have a hosting package built into that, which would involve, a dedicated server costing you, sort of $100, $200 a month just to run this one, potentially quite small and, lightweight website. And when you're running a CMS site, not only does it generally cost a fair bit to run, but it's also quite slow. You've got your server churning away there. It's really generally not terribly optimized, so you lose a lot of Google juice in terms of your page speed rankings and stuff. And more seriously, and the reason we got the dumpster fire there is that CMSs have a habit of being hacked. So I have more than once had to recover a website that somebody, some hacker came along and found a vulnerability in a slightly out of date and as yet unpatched CMS or even server. And I mean, this is fresh off the press, but just 2 weeks ago, somebody who I used to work with on a website, they still had their old CMS still running on their old dedicated server, and their entire hosting provider got hacked. The whole hosting provider went down. So, I'm not a great fan of that model. Even if it's a managed platform, it's never that fast, it's never that cheap, and it's never that secure. And another thing worth bearing in mind, again, sort of, hot of the press from last week is just an example. I'm over in Ireland on Irish TV. There's a fairly popular TV show that did an appeal for children at Christmas, and usual sort of thing. Everybody, they opened up the appeal. Everybody piled onto the website, and the website keeled under the pressure. Couldn't keep up with all the people wanting to make the donations, and that was, a fairly professionally set up website. That wasn't a CMS, that was actually somebody who was sitting there, had made a donation website and was expecting people in, but it still couldn't scale fast enough. So really what we want to look at here is something that's fast, cheap, secure and scalable. So what I'm going to be talking about here today is what I refer to as, serverless websites. So I'll talk about what I mean by a serverless website. Then I'll talk about how you can put one together. Then I'll talk about, for the Azure side of things, how Azure Static Web Apps fits into the picture. And then I'll do a very simple demo of moving from a WordPress site over to a serverless website. No, I'm afraid, if you were coming here for the magic one that turns your WordPress site into a serverless website in one button press, I'm afraid you're going to be disappointed. But it hopefully will show the principles. So serverless websites, like I say, so that's my term for what you might also have heard of as Jamstack. Jamstack stands for JavaScript APIs and Markup. And it's a bit of a paradigm shift from the standard server-based model. So, we're not going to be talking about a PHP site here or an ASP.NET site or, a Django site or anything like that. What you have when you're setting up a serverless website is, the first thing you've got is static content. So the core of your site, so your homepage, for instance, will be just sitting there purely as HTML and CSS. And the rest of your site, all the rest of your posts and your site areas and all that sort of stuff will be based on static HTML pages, which get served directly from something like blob storage or from a CDN or something like that. Now, obviously, that can work for a lot of things, but every so often you're going to actually want it to be able to do something interactive. So what you then do is you add some JavaScript to it, or I guess Blazor if you're feeling brave, but you add some client-side scripting to that. And then to make sure that it's properly serverless, you're then going to have functions as a service behind that with an API to provide the server-side things that you need to actually provide the functionality on your website. So like I say, it's a bit weird. It feels a bit weird if you're just used to writing an ASP.NET site or something like that, that everything is static and everything goes through JavaScript. But it does have a lot of advantages. Now, I say the first advantage is speed. If you're serving everything from just a content store, then that's really, really fast. There's no server in the way. You're literally just fetching resources. And if you've got a CDN behind that, you can have all the content that you need to serve pretty much the whole site right next to the person who's browsing it. The scalability, you're getting true serverless. Basically, if nobody is using your site, you're not getting any bandwidth costs. You're not getting any functions as a service costs, from the serverless functions. Literally, the only thing you're paying for is the storage of your content, which, generally speaking, is going to be the order of cents a month. But on the other hand, obviously, storage, there's no limit to how much you can access cloud storage, and serverless API can scale up extremely quickly to the scale of whatever you're going to throw at it. So you've got you've got scalability all the way from 0 up to practically infinity. So you can do your massive donations when they turn in, and the cost is really low. As I mentioned, if nobody's coming in, you're not paying, and when you are running, all you're paying for is the bandwidth you're using and the standard per millisecond billing of your functions as a service, which is going to be a lot less than your $200 a month for your dedicated server, or even your $20 a month for a hosted WordPress site or something like that. Security-wise, obviously, when you're talking about just the content side of things, the static side of things, unless somebody can hack your Azure Active Directory, get into your Azure subscription and get into your storage, then you're safe. And there's nobody going around trying to break into, well, there probably is some, the Chinese government is probably going around trying to break into Azure, but people, generally speaking, don't break into Azure unless you've put a really stupidly insecure password on it. And the functions as a service, similarly, although they're open, you can wrap authentication around those. So, and the code is, generally speaking, your own small bits of code which are nice and easy to make secure. There's it's relatively easy to secure a serverless API. Stability wise, it's a platform, and there's no server there to go up or down or to be patched. So in theory, your site will never go down. It's portable. Because it's just files and a serverless API, you can lift your files anywhere. So you can dump them on any cloud provider, you can run it locally, you can stick it in a sort of a storage bucket. You can stick it in your local ISP. But it's really easy just to zip up your files, move them somewhere else, and run from wherever. And you get a lot of flexibility. So from the developer point of view, you're not tied to a PHP or tied to an ASP.NET website. You've got just your APIs behind it, which can, as long as they run, as long as they're an API that you can access, you can have anything sitting behind that. So there's no there's no necessity to have all your code in the same place, all in the same language. So if you've got the plugin that you want to use, an API plugin, a third-party one, then you can do that. And I should point out that the other thing that's worth mentioning is that you can do pretty much anything with one of these serverless websites that you can with a traditional website. There are companies out there running their entire web stack, including their back-end stuff, all on this style of hosting and website, with no server-side code apart from a serverless API. So putting this together, what are we going to have in there? Now, I mean, we don't need any of these. These are all optional. In theory, a serverless site could just be a couple of HTML files and a bit of CSS that you've stuffed out there, a completely static site. But generally speaking, you're going to want some sort of static site generator. So that's something that takes content, so your blog posts or your image gallery entries or the comments, and takes that raw content and turns it into a pure HTML site. Then, if that's not enough to deal with what you've got, then you will take a JavaScript library or framework and put that on top of it. You will then have serverless API, which you need to have behind that. And in terms of actually managing that content I was talking about, you'll want some sort probably of headless CMS. Now, you can, with most static sites, edit the content directly in Markdown or something, but if you're used to a CMS model, then you'll want something that can edit those. So you'll either be looking at something like Contentful or Netlify CMS, which are designed for this situation, or what people do, the people who have migrated from WordPress to a serverless model, they actually still use WordPress as the content management system. It's just that they never let the public see it. So that's hidden somewhere safely behind the firewall that they use to edit the content. And then, as we'll see later on, you can pull that content out of WordPress through the API, push that in, convert that into the content the static site generator is expecting, and then generate that. So that's the moving parts. And then to actually turn that into a site that somebody can browse, you need to have it hosted up somewhere. So the bits you need to do that, you need, generally speaking, some sort of CI/CD workflow. So when you create new content, then something needs to go off and rebuild your whole website and push that out to wherever it's hosted. You'll need your storage. Now, so for instance, Azure Storage for a while has had this thing called static website hosting, where basically you can dump storage into blobs, and then Azure wraps just a tiny bit of ceremony around that to allow you to access it as if it were a normal website. And then you'll need your functions as a service platform, so your Lambda or your Azure Functions or your Google Cloud Functions or whatever you've got hosted on Kubernetes. So there's essentially three elements there that you'll need to get everything hosted and deployed. Excuse me. And that's where Azure Static Web Apps comes in. So Static Web Apps is a new preview service that's come out of largely pushed by the Azure Functions side of things. But that pulls it all together into one coherent service. So you've got GitHub Actions for your CI/CD workflow. You've got Static Web Apps provides you with its own content storage, and it also integrates Azure Functions in there. And it's still in preview, so yes, they are aware that Azure DevOps is a thing, and that you might not want to use GitHub. There's more, plenty more to come, but they pulled all those things together so that you've now got one service which can do this serverless website thing for you. You could call it a static website. I don't like static web apps because it implies that nothing happens on it and they can't do anything. It's just sitting there being boring. So that's why I prefer serverless websites. But marketing says static, so static it is. And this is the basic workflow. So as I said, at the moment it's GitHub only, but they're working on other things for that. But you have a repository, so a GitHub repo, and that contains your source content, so whatever you're going to feed to your static site generator. And every time you make a change to that through a push or through a PR, then that will trigger, obviously, a GitHub action. The GitHub action looks at what's in your repository, builds that out to static content and to Azure Functions, and then it pushes that content and those functions out to the static web app side in Azure for the actual hosting. And then as soon as that's deployed, then your users can come along and see the new version of the site. So we'll walk through what exactly is going on there. So, and the first bit there in the CI/CD, when you create a static web app, what it will do is you always tell it where your repository is, and it will automatically provision into that repository the GitHub actions, the workflows that are necessary to work with whatever you've chosen to build your serverless website with, or your static web app with. So Hugo, Gatsby, ViewPress there are sort of popular static site generators, and it will use a project called Oryx, which is used in Azure App Service, to build those for you. It will also understand the main JavaScript and front-end frameworks, so it'll be able to build you an Angular site or a React site, so it'll do all the web packing and stuff for you. It will even build you a Blazor site, and if there's nothing there that it actually recognizes immediately, then it allows you to do custom build steps. So you can either just do a plain one where you've already built it yourself, or it will allow you to say, okay, this is my build command, this is where my build is going to end up, the deployable part of my build will end up, and it will then allow you to do that for whatever. So for instance, if you're using Jekyll or something which isn't on that list and it's not supported, then you can just put in the Jekyll build command. The other really nice thing here is that it automatically builds a preview for you when somebody submits a PR. So when somebody wants to make an update to the site, and if they don't have the permissions to push directly to master or to main, then they will put that in with a pull request. And as soon as a pull request comes in, GitHub will wake up, it will fire off some actions, and it will actually provision a second site for you where you can see that PR privately. So you, as the person who's approving the stuff that's going into your website, can actually go and see exactly what the website's going to look like with this PR in, go and check everything, and then approve it. And when it's approved, then that's exactly what you'll get as soon as it's deployed it to public. So it means you don't have to do these horrible sort of workflows where you've got an update on a public site and you have to log in to see the changes, and you have all these complex workflows. You can just see exactly what the public are going to see as soon as it comes in and approve on that basis. Another nice thing that's built into static web apps is authentication. So what they've added in is they've added in some OAuth login endpoints that you can use. So essentially, you've got a path called .auth/Facebook, for instance, and if you direct somebody to that endpoint, then it will go through the Facebook workflow. You can also use Azure AD, you can use GitHub, you can use Google, and you can use Twitter. I'm imagining they might even support Microsoft logins one day, but there's always that hope. But that's all handled for you. So, so when you log in, those credentials are handled. You get a JOT, a JWT token. You get a few claims on that, so you get to know, what the identity of that person is, who, which provider they use to log in, and obviously it's got a log out endpoint as well. But you get all that built in, and you can then go and use that in your API. So the nice thing about static web apps is, you don't have to build a separate API project. You just have an API folder in your web app, and you can put in there essentially a standard Azure Functions project in either C#, JavaScript or TypeScript or Python. Again, I assume that other languages will be coming along as well. They actually launched with only JavaScript, so they brought in C# and Python since then. But those functions are then part of your project, so they get built and deployed at the same time. They run within your site, so you don't have to bother about cross-origin things. And as long as you've used the standard OAuth authentication there, then they also, as well as being barred at the routing stage, which I'll talk about in a minute, they also have access to the information about the user that you're logged in as. So that can be used for whatever you need behind the scenes to provide the information for the person who's logged in. Routing, as I was just mentioning there, you can configure a fair number of things in this special routes.json file. So you've got the standard routing, which is path rewriting, so you can take stuff that's coming, take paths that are coming in and send them to different paths. So for instance, if you want /login to go to /.auth/Facebook, so you always have a Facebook login at the /login thing, you can do that. And also at that level, you can add role-based access control. So in static web apps, you can define user roles, and then you can invite your Facebook users or your AD users to specific roles, and then you can in the routes.json file say that for instance /customers is only going to be visible to people with the customers role, or /admin is only going to be visible to people with the /admin role. It also allows you to do proper redirects. So if you want a path to go off to somewhere else with a 301 or 302 redirect, you can add that in. It's where you define your custom error pages, so you're pretty not found, or you're pretty sort of oops, something went wrong page. You can pop in MIME types if you really need them, and also again useful mostly from a security point of view, you can stick custom headers in there. So if you want to add the I mustn't be in an iframe header or something like that, or if you want to remove headers that you think might be insecure, then you can do that through the routes.json file as well. So that's where you essentially do all that configuration to make your site look like you want it to. And if you're moving from a WordPress site, you might want to be to throw a load of routes in there for your old URLs to sort of the URLs that you've actually got in your generated content. Some other useful things. It supports custom domains. So if you've got your own vanity domain, so if you want to bring along markxa.com, then you can do that. Well, when I say that, that's not strictly true at the moment. In preview, you can only bring www.markxa.com. So they're not supporting Apex domains in preview. I assume from the way they phrase that it will, once it goes GA, be able to do Apex domains, but you can't do that right now. So if that's important to you and you can't do a redirect to www, then you might have to step back for a minute. But that's basically in there, and obviously SSL certificates and stuff as well. There's a Visual Studio Code extension that you can use to develop and deploy all this sort of stuff. And there's just a list there of some of the frameworks that they say will work with it. So as long as you put the right build command that we were talking about, you can run on any of those frameworks and many more, essentially out of the box. So this is normally where I would ask for questions, but I'm guessing we're not going to do that in the virtual one. So I will move over to a brief demo here with a bit of luck. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to be building a Hugo-based website. So Hugo is a static site generator that's based, the reason it's called Hugo is it's based on the Go language templating engine. So I'm going to take a dummy WordPress site, pull that over, turn it into a Hugo site, and have just a tiny bit of JavaScript and Azure Functions going on as well, just so you can see how that hangs together. So, right. So this isn't the one I'm going to do. This is just an example, just so you can see how Hugo works and how how a static site generator works. So here I have the sort of the Hugo site for the developer conference I was talking about before we started the session. And you can see in here, essentially, we've got a content folder, static folder, which contains fav icons and stuff. And then there's a theme there, which contains the layouts and things and static files for the particular skin or theme, or whatever you want to call it, that our site is going to use. And then there's a basic configuration file there. In the content here, you can see files like this. So that's basically marked down with some front matter. So this is the content for a specific session that's going to be delivered by a couple of different speakers. Day 2, track 2 at 4:15, and this is some markdown text that gets generated. And this is how Hugo does it. So everything is basically templated off content. So this is a Hugo template where I'm pulling in all the sessions, and then I'm picking out day 1, track 1, day 2, track 1, sorting them by time, and then doing some simple templating down here, pulling in some partials. So very simply, that's what one of these sites is going to look like, from sort of before it's built. And then once it's built, so it goes into, when you build it, it goes into this public folder, which isn't in source control. And you can see that turns out with an index.html file, which pulls in all the CSS and stuff we want. So, that just gets generated into this purely static site here in the public folder. And, so that's what that looks like at the end of the day. So you can see here, those testimonials that are going through there, they are, sort of in the testimonials content there. Further down, we've got sponsors, platinum sponsors, we've got gold sponsors, we've got a list of speakers, and that page I was showing you earlier with the agenda. So, that's how we've drawn that all together, is, sort of through just basic content and templating. So that's the sort of thing I'm going to build. So the next thing I've got here is just a little WordPress site. So, all I've done here is I've just fired up a couple of Docker containers with the standard WordPress Docker stuff in it on my local machine, and thrown in a bit of random content there. So there's a few pages, and if we go to the top level there, we can see there's a few, just four dummy posts in there. And what we then need to do is to go and create a static, we're going to create a Hugo website and create a static web app for that. So first thing I'll do, I've got an empty-ish repository here, my virtual Azure Community Day demo repository there. And what I will do is I shall go to the portal, Azure portal, and create a static web app. Those, I'm going to create a new one. So I'm going to pull up one I made earlier. I'll call it virtual Azure Community Day demo. I'll stick it in Europe because we like Europe. I will sign in, whoops, with GitHub here, if I can find it. Second, I'm just going to do this on the other screen. Right, so I'm logged into GitHub. This is all live, by the way, I'm not recorded. MarkXA is me. That was the vacd demo repo, and it's going to be on the main branch. And then you can see here it's got some presets here. So yeah, you can see the standard JavaScript and front-end frameworks there, and then you know static site generators you might want to use, or if it's none of those, then we can go for custom and fill our own thing in here. We'll go for Hugo there. We could configure those if we wanted to, but as you can see, public was where we were going to dump our actual output, and the actual Hugo site is just at the root level. So that will then create, we can see here that's going to create a GitHub action workflow that does what we need there to push it out to static web apps. So I will create that. We'll deploy. Doesn't usually take very long. There we are. And here we are in our thing. And so if I hit that there, we'll see that we have an empty static web app waiting for us. So next thing I'm going to do, I am going to bring up. So this is Visual Studio. Don't worry too much about this code. This is stuff that I've mostly nicked off other places. But just to show you what's going on here, that is essentially some code that understands the WordPress API and understands Hugo and can pull the content and pages out of WordPress and turn them into Hugo content. So, and this is where I cross my fingers very hard. If I run that, I'll just go through, pull the stuff out, and it ran. So now what we should have here is the Hugo website into which we now have posts generated there. So that one's just been created there, as you can see just now. And you can see here, here's the content that we've created. So if I now go into the console here, I will add all my content, and I will push that up to, of course, what I forgotten to do there was to pull the changes when it went and pushed its GitHub actions into my repo here. So if I refresh that, you can see here in GitHub workflows, that's where that YAML that it created has ended up. And if I go to GitHub actions here, you can see that it's now running that build and deploy for us. That will potentially take a minute or two, so I will just go quickly back over here and just show you what I've got in here, as well as all these folders, which are just the standard Hugo stuff, and the GitHub folder, which is our actions. We've also got this API folder, and within that we've got some Azure functions. So here we have a very simple Azure function in JavaScript, which just pulls in essentially the contact form that we're submitting and returns it back as a response. In the real world, we'd have a contact form that would actually do an output here to some sort of email service, but in this case we're just returning it straight back. But that's an example of an API. And if we go back, that's nearly done there. And deploying. Shouldn't take very long. These always run faster when, when you're not live. There we go. So if we go back here and refresh there, we have now, this is now a Hugo site with all the same content in it. Now here, obviously, we've got an off-the-shelf Hugo theme rather than an off-the-shelf WordPress theme. Now there are actually some WordPress themes which have a WordPress equivalent, but you can see here, this is a different site, but with all the same content in. It's not that difficult to turn something into a Hugo theme because at the end of the day, it's just the same HTML and the same content placeholders just in Go format. But you can see we've got a list here to all our blog posts. We've also got here that page there that we saw earlier, and we also have. Oops. We don't have. Okay, but it's just proving it's a live demo. The API, the contact form didn't end up in there for whatever reason. But I suppose I'll just generally talk here about if you are moving from a WordPress site, you can get all the content over like this. If you've got a gallery, for instance, you'll need to pull in some sort of JavaScript gallery, even an old jQuery one would do, but something that can take those those images and turn them into a gallery. And any of your other WordPress plugins, if they're not the SEO ones and stuff that you don't really need with a static website, then you'll need to replace those with something that either you've written yourself or some sort of plugin. So for instance, WordPress comments, so if you want people to be able to actually comment on your blog posts, Hugo by default has Disqus built in, but it's that sort of thing where you'll want to drop in somebody else's third-party JavaScript or write your own API and call out to that API depending on exactly how custom you want it. Right, I think that's everything for the demo. So we'll get back to So did somebody say something there?
Yep, we're back in the studio. So, yeah, thanks, Mark. This was a great session. I don't think you were quite finished yet, but because we are running out of time.
That's the summary slide, that's the end.
That's the end. Okay, sorry then.
We killed the final slide. We do apologize for
Yes.
that, Mark.
But there was this question if you are willing to share the slides. So,
yes, absolutely. What I'm hoping to do is to get all that code tidied up, and actually, I'm going to be hopefully turning this into a workshop that you can step through as well properly. So
that would be great.
Something on GitHub as well.
That would be great. So I have one question for you. So the PR preview that you showed us, it looks really great. Is that like comparable to staging slot in app service?
It's the same sort of thing. You don't swap the same way as you would with slots in app service. It's just a completely new site that's been created and it lives by itself. So as long as the PR is there, then that will be deployed. And as soon as the PR gets closed, then it will get deleted. But so it's a completely separate website. But yeah, you can think of it as very similar to slots. It's just you're not swapping. You're doing a separate deploy then to the main public one.
Exactly. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so the only remark I basically had, well, maybe it's more a confession because I am one of those WordPress dinos out there. And it felt a bit scary to see that I could easily transition into a modern website this way. But you totally convinced me when I saw GitHub Actions. So I'm gonna change my website.
You don't have to leave WordPress behind entirely. If you like the WordPress authoring experience, you can still use that. But say it's the public experience that you're looking at here. So the really fast sites, the really fast load times, and the high security because your WordPress site is now behind a firewall and nobody can hack it. Hopefully.
Okay, that's good to know. So thank you very much for the presentation. And hopefully we'll be able to meet again soon maybe even in a live setting.
Let's hope so. Vaccines ahoy, apparently. So.
True.
All right.
So thank you
very much, everybody.
Jorrit, as well for hosting with me
you too,
today,
Esther.
because I really had a great time. But I guess all good things must come to an end.
Yep. The next hosts are
eagerly
they're
waiting.
Eagerly waiting. So that's it for us. So thank you very much for having us, and hopefully we will see you next time.
Enjoy the rest of the event. Bye.